This is All India Radio. Under the Azadi Amrit Mahotsav series of Spotlight program, now we bring a discussion on digital transactions make a mark in India. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist.
Data released by National Payment Corporation of India or NPCI says that Unified Payment Interface has clocked over 6 billion transactions in the month of July. This is highest ever since the inception in 2016. Mr. Bhattacharya, what is the significance of this number?
This clearly shows the popularity of the Unified Payment Interface. As many of your listeners would recognize, that this is a platform of recent origin. This was started only probably in around June or July of 2016. And this is an interface which has got three main purposes. At one level, it allows a user of a mobile phone to download the app and link that app to his or her bank account and make transactions on that, whether for payment to a service provider or a goods provider, or to transfer money from one bank account to another bank account. Now, this happens in a seamless way through an OTP recognition of the user. So it's a fairly simple, easy transaction methodology using a technological platform called Unified Payment Interface. It has been embraced. The fact that it has been embraced very quickly, particularly during the COVID time, is proof that at a time when people were not going out to their banks, going out to buying goods or services to the place, they were using the UPI platform. Because still October 2019, the usage was only of 1 billion transactions. And now it has gone up in the last 3 years, it has gone up to 6 billion transactions. So that itself shows that how during the COVID time, its utility and its use actually gone up several times.
Mr. Bhattacharya, if we take the absolute number in terms of transaction, which is 10.6 lakh crore or 10.62 trillion rupees, considering the cash transaction we have in the economy, do you think that this is much less than expectation, or do you think that it is meeting the expectation?
I would say that UPI is not just for dissuading people from cash and encouraging them to use a cashless transaction. This is actually a platform by which the ease of making payments and ease of receiving payments is actually given a big impetus. So yes, I entirely agree with you that seeing the rise of use in cash, particularly in the last few years, can be disconcerting for many people, but there are also many economies in the world which are highly cash dependent. Take Japan or take Brazil. So I would not judge the performance of UPI on the yardstick of how much cash is still being used. On the contrary, what I would say and what I would like to see is whether UPI transactions in themselves are going up or not. The fact that they have gone up several folds in the last few years shows the popularity of UPI and its technological advancement. In a sense, it is a seamless transactions. Failure rates are very low. That, to my mind, is something that needs to be recognized.
The other thing is that when we say a digital transaction, at the same time we also see the cash in circulation is rising. So we are seeing digital transaction is rising and we are also seeing cash in circulation rising. How do you see these two contradictions?
Well, I don't see this as a contradiction. I think the increased use of cash is happening because probably people don't want to come under the tax net. They don't want to keep a record of their transactions in the public domain, or at least in the domain where the tax authorities or anybody in the government can track them. So that is also a tendency to evade or avoid being watched or being tracked for your transaction. That is a big incentive for going in for cash. There are also small transactions where people are not encouraged enough to go in for UPI for the simple reason that even in small villages and small towns, cash transaction is considered easier and better because it has got no other associated costs. Now, for UPI payment, you need to have a technology compliant mobile phone. You need to have an identity, which is an online identity, And there are a large number of people in this country who are technologically quite illiterate, and they may not go in for UPI kind of payments, and they may prefer still to go in for cash. There is yet another reason why cash still holds an advantage over the digital payment format like UPI, which we can discuss later.
When we say increase in digital payment, it also indicates a formalization in the economy. And we have seen the impact of formalization in economy, just like what we saw increase in the GST collection, as was reported today, that GST collection reached 1.49 lakh crore in the month of July. So do you think that the higher number of digital transaction means more formalization of the economy, and that will reflect in the tax number, and that will also help in various other activities?
Yes, there is no doubt that more digital transactions, greater use of a unified payment interface will actually lead us to formalization of the economy. I would argue that yes, formalization of the economy through such digital transaction encouragement and through such greater use of digital transaction is a good thing, but this cannot be an end in itself. You have to make digital payments a preferred mode of payment, and that is possible if the costs and the necessary wherewithal that we need for making a digital transaction are made more accessible and made more easier and made more inviting, if I may use the word. Right now, there is a big question mark over greater use of unified payment interface and digital transactions because of an impending policy change on the levy of merchant discount rate on linked RuPay and even to UPI. Right now, there is no merchant discount rate levied on any UPI payment, but the day is not far off where the UPI payment will also start attracting maybe a very small percentage of the total transaction amount, but this itself, to my mind, will be a big hurdle, so to say, in promoting digital transactions, in promoting the use of unified payment interface, because people will consider cash to be an easier and less costly transaction mode than UPI. So therefore, our policy environment and our awareness programs will have to keep pace with the need to make use of digital transactions as easy, as less costly as a platform than cash if we want to achieve the goal of reducing the use of cash in our economy.
So I wanted to bring the issue of merchant discount rate, as you rightly mentioned, that we need to see that the cost should not go up. But do you think that the MDR is really necessary, because there is a one-time investment and the recurring investment is not that much high, where you need to collect more and more money through the MDR for the digital transaction, because it is discouraging people to use that. So what is the way out?
The big debate over such things is always been that a public good versus private good. The way the unified payment interface has been conceived, it is being run by an entity which is not purely a government entity. It is an entity which is promoted and its shareholders are different financial intermediaries. They are providing this service, but we cannot assume that these services do not have a cost. So every service has a cost, and even if it is a very small percentage of cost, that cost has to be reimbursed. So there may not be a profit motive. The merchant discount rate need not be levied at a rate which provides them huge profit, but certainly reimbursement of the cost incurred in creating that service is something that people should not mind. What is important is that if an X person wants to use unified payment interface at a price, then whether his payment capacity is good or not is something that is to be kept in mind from a policy perspective. Like we do have a free food ration program. Now that free food ration program is not going to everybody. So therefore, from a policy perspective, I would say that UPI cannot be free. MDR needs to be levied, but probably these initial stages, you can make MDR not a factor to be kept in mind, not a factor that needs to be enforced for transactions made by people below a certain income level. That way, you will be encouraging people to embrace this digital transaction, and as and when they graduate to a level where of a certain income strata, they can probably make that payment. It's a bit like the subsidies for services that should not be enjoyed by people who can otherwise afford that service without the need for that subsidy.
Even if MDR is imposed, there is an increase in the volume that will also help in reducing the MDR or bringing it to a very minimal level. Can be
You are absolutely right. The manner in which the number of transactions, like you said, there are 6 billion transactions in July. There were 1 billion transactions in 2019 per month. So clearly it is really rapidly rising, and as it has been seen that every billion transaction increase per month is happening much faster. So it is a question of what rate we should enforce, and that rate must be enforced keeping in mind the number of transactions, the value of those transactions, because please remember, bulk of those transactions, you talked about some 10 lakh crore transactions, is actually small amounts by a larger number of people. So therefore, you have to keep in mind that at what level and how we should levy that MDR. If you link the MDR to the value of the transaction, then probably, and also the person who is making the transaction, his income level, probably that will be a more fair and equitable rate. For example, there are many transactions you already make. If the transaction is more than 1,000 rupees, you do pay a service charge. But if the transaction is less than 1,000 rupees, you don't pay a service charge. So probably a method and a system has to be evolved to kill both the birds with one stone, which is to keep encouraging the use of digital transactions with platforms like the UPI, and at the same time not throttle or not deprive the service providers of these interfaces the legitimate revenue they need to earn to reimburse the costs they have incurred for creating that facility.
One issue now is that what next? And what we understand that UPI has set a target of 1 billion transaction a day. Do you think that it is feasible in coming days?
I will not at all doubt the feasibility part. Remember that India is a country of 140 billion people, and right now people are making these transactions either through cash or through bank checks or bank payments. But if UPI comes in, because UPI comes in and allows even from merchant to merchant transactions, merchant to customer transactions, customer to customer transactions. So if all those transactions can happen on UPI and digital methodology, then there is no reason to believe or disbelieve this number that it cannot reach 1 billion transactions a day.
And one more question, that RBI has recently allowed linking of RuPay credit card to UPI. How this is going to help raising the volume bar?
Most public sector banks are issuing their debit cards with the RuPay facility. Now, once that is linked, the RuPay and the UPI is linked, then you are actually bringing under your fold a large number of customers who may not be using their UPI right now. So certainly, the linkage of UPI and RuPay will mean a plus for the success of UPI. But remember, with RuPay comes the MDR issue. If RuPay is linked, then there has to be a payment of the merchant discount rate. At what rate is something is a matter of debate. But the question that we need to answer is, do we as a country want more digital transactions? As a country, do we need to enlarge the inclusiveness, the financial inclusion of our society? Right now, the financial inclusion agenda will remain incomplete if we don't encourage digital transactions and also make sure that the large number of people who are right now the digitally excluded number of people, in the sense people who don't have access to a mobile phone or people who don't want to use a mobile phone, how they can be brought into this net so that the benefits of digital transaction, the benefits of unified payment interface flow to all kinds of people of different strata of society.
Mr. Bhattacharya, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Under the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav series, you were listening to a discussion on digital transactions make a mark in India. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.